Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion with Rebecca Sargent from Markham Stouffville Hospital. We are waiting for the director of recruiting for FGF Brands. Might be experiencing some technical difficulties, so we're going to get started. And if they do appear or are able to get on, then we will ask them or invite them to join our conversation. So this is going to be a Q&A portion of the event. As you can imagine, Rebecca's been very busy as being part of the Markham Stouffville Hospital and all the things that have been happening with the pandemic. So I'm sure this is going to be a very informative and interesting conversation surrounding, some of the trials and tribulations she's been facing, maybe some of the positive things that have come out of COVID and hiring. She was just mentioning to me that she has 186 jobs that are available within the hospital. So going to talk about that and maybe include some resources of how you can apply to those positions. So really looking forward to the discussion and really want to thank Rebecca for her time and being here today. So thanks so much, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe we'll start with a brief introduction. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about your background, what you do for the hospital, and then we can get into some more, advice and tips for, our job seekers that are listening of what they can do and incorporate into their job search. And then we'll talk a little bit about the roles you're looking to fill. So maybe just a brief history and background of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So after my bachelor's degree, I did a postgraduate certificate in human resources, did an internship in healthcare, which is really what got me interested in healthcare in the first place. Had a couple other positions, and then I was hired on as a human resources associate at Markham Stouffville Hospital. And after a couple of years working as a human resources associate, I moved into the recruitment specialist role. And now I'm currently the senior recruitment specialist at Markham Stouffville. So we have 3 recruiters for the whole hospital. And as Rachel mentioned, we now have 185 vacancies. So at the height of the pandemic, we had 330. So right now, 185 is pretty good. But we recruit for a whole variety of positions within the hospital. So, we're very busy doing all aspects of recruitment.
I can imagine that's a lot of jobs to fill.
Yes, can get a little overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. I should mention too, as we go along, if anyone has any questions, we have about 25 minutes for the session. So we will gladly take any questions that you have for Rebecca or about Markham Stouffville Hospital or just about job search in general. I've been in the industry for about 15 years. I see things from a lot of different perspectives. Working at TorontoJobs.ca, we work with recruiters, we work with HR managers, we work with job seekers, we work with recruiting agencies. So I get a lot of different perspectives and I see a lot of different, resources and new advice and tips and things like that and technology that's emerging in the recruiting space. So feel free to ask any questions either in the stage chat would be preferable on the right-hand side. So maybe let's talk about, I think the thing that maybe a lot of people are wondering, including myself, is what has changed in your recruiting process since the pandemic started?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely gotten harder to recruit for positions because with healthcare, it's such a competitive environment. And so all of the hospitals right now are in the same boat that we're trying to compete for that same small group of people who, so candidates really have the option of going anywhere. So COVID has made it more challenging because, the more experienced people, they want to stay where they are, they want to support their team through this challenging time. And we also have staff, who've worked, 18 months during the pandemic now, they're burnt out. So that's also creating more vacancies because, it's been overwhelming for our healthcare staff as well, which is why at one point, we got to 330 vacancies. So that's really created challenges. And when people weren't vaccinated and couldn't work at multiple hospitals or healthcare. So that's created so many vacancies as well. And it's interesting because it really depends on the position as well. So for a unit secretary, I'm still getting up to 300 applicants. Wow. But for a registered nurse position, I'm lucky if I get 10 applicants. So it really depends on the position as well. Some you're just getting so many because some industries, more people are out of work. So you really get so many applicants, and others, there's just not enough people to fill all the vacancies. So it's really interesting depending on the position.
Right. No, that definitely makes sense. And I want to take questions. Is that okay with you as we go along? We have
of course.
Here. So does your organization have a dedicated DE&I or L&D department, or is it part of HR activities?
That's a great question. So right now it is part of human resources activities. So we have an EDI committee. And so we're really working towards making sure that we're EDI focused. We also have a contract person who is EDI, who, we contract out from another organization. So we've been working with her to educate ourselves more as well, because we don't want to educate managers until we are, fully educated and know everything about EDI. We're learning every day. We were told recently that, saying the word fit actually isn't EDI friendly. We should say we're hiring for best alignment. So we're constantly learning so that we can be even more EDI focused.
Yeah, that's a great point too. So many things are changing in HR world, since the pandemic started. And I feel for HR, people that are in a position of recruiting in HR, because there's so many things coming at you, in terms of people's benefits and mental health, and people changing roles and needing a break, like you were mentioning, but not to mention all the restructuring and COVID regulations and things like that, which I'm sure are probably the most intense working in the hospital. So, I always have sympathy for people that are working in healthcare. Well, anyone working in HR, but specifically healthcare, it's really tough. Oh, sorry, we have a follow up to that question. But do you also have corporate sponsors and KPI metrics to determine your progress?
So I'm not part of the EDI committee, so I'm not sure of all of the details. If we have corporate sponsors or not. I know that, we have certain goals that we try to meet, but I wouldn't say that we have metrics that, you have to fill like a certain quota.
Sure, that makes sense. So kind of moving into maybe, some advice for job seekers. You mentioned that you get, 300 applications to some of the more, administrative or customer service types of roles. And I know the one complaint we get quite often is, we don't get a response from employers or companies. And that has been the trend for, 10 or 15 years. Can't necessarily respond to 300 applicants on a personal basis to follow up or give feedback. So what, what is your advice to someone that wants a customer service role? They might have the experience. Like, do all 300 applications get reviewed? What could they do to stand out? I'm sure you have a tracking system that, sorts resumes and things like that. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that process and, how job seekers can be less discouraged about applying, knowing that information.
Yeah, absolutely. So when people apply, as you mentioned, we have a tracking system. So when people apply to our positions, they have to answer a few questions and that scores them. So when I have 300 applicants, I'm not able to go through all 300. So I look at who are the people with the highest score. So I might go through the top 100 applicants that scored the best, which should mean that they have the most qualifications to the position. And I go through those and I might send the top 10 or 15 resumes to the manager. The biggest thing I notice is a lot of times resumes just aren't strong. They just don't give the information. Sometimes they don't say job title, or if it's in healthcare, they don't say which department. If I'm, trying to hire for an emergency nurse and it just says that you're a nurse at another hospital, I don't know if that means emergency or not, so I'm going to move on. So one of the biggest things is to double check your resume, because the amount of resumes that aren't great, or sometimes, people attach the wrong thing and they don't actually attach the resume often as well. So definitely double checking that, because that's never good when I have to reach out to a candidate and say, you attached the wrong item to the applicant. But definitely the resume is the biggest thing, making sure that it stands out. If I'm looking at 100 resumes, I only have maybe 10 seconds to look at your resume. So does it meet the qualifications? So you want to make it as easy as possible for me to look and say, okay, they have 4 years unit secretary experience. They're moving on to the next round.
That's perfect. No, that's great advice. I know I do see still a lot of very common mistakes being made on resumes, and you really have to be meticulous, like a spelling error or, uploading your wrong resume altogether. It could have been the perfect job. So you really have to be meticulous as a job seeker, definitely. I mentioned in the opening remarks, one of my main things when I'm reviewing an application is seeing, not just telling me that you have strong customer service experience, but really proving those things. And I know that might not go through an ATS system, but if they make it through that, you're reviewing those resumes. And I think it's so important for people to really tell their story and show how, they have strong customer service skills instead of just saying it. 'Cause it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to kind of show stats and just instances where you really thrived. And you can do that through a cover letter. I know not all employers read cover letters, some do, some ask for them, some don't, but that's really your chance if there is an opportunity for you to tell your story through those cover letters. What are some of the common things that you look for on a resume? Like what would be your top three things that I know this is a very general question because it could be different for all different. You're looking for something different on a nursing resume to an admin resume, but just from a perspective of like a very high level, what would you kind of what could a job seeker improve upon, or what should they be doing more of on their resume? I know I just mentioned one, like adding more, percentage quantitative information and numbers. But from your perspective, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I completely agree with you about the quantitative, more of that as well, because if the 10 resumes that I'm sending to the manager, that means that those 10 meet the qualifications, and I may be only looking at it 10 seconds, but that manager is going through all 10 resumes. And, of these 10 resumes, who has the strongest one that's going to stand out? So they're going to be reading those resumes thoroughly. So you really want that, how do you demonstrate customer service, all of that in your resume. The things that I definitely look at, what's your most recent experience? What was your position? How long too? That's a big thing I look at is, the length of time, because it can be a red flag for us if, they're constantly leaving positions. And if they're contracts, then put contract on your resume, because then it's less of a red flag. If you were just doing contract positions, then we understand why, you were going to multiple jobs versus, you just choosing to leave them.
No, that's perfect. Sorry, did you? Were you all finished? Sorry.
Yeah, I think those are definitely some of the biggest ones that I look for. Definitely.
Absolutely. So I guess moving into we covered off resumes. Maybe we can talk about cover letters if we have some time. But I think the one thing, if the pandemic has taught us anything, is that we need to get better at our video skills. So virtual interviews are a thing that it was kind of emerging. I mean, there was video resumes came out quite a while ago, like 7 or 8 years ago. It didn't really take off very, very much at that time. But there was a lot of new technologies that were emerging that you could, pre-record yourself on doing an elevator pitch. You could have an actual video resumes. I think there's a website called Vid Resumes. And it didn't really, but as the pandemic started, everything became virtual. So now there's some organizations that actually have a system where you're not even, doing an interview with a person, you're just talking to a screen. And pre-screen you that way without a live person, but it's still electronic. So, I'm sure you've switched to a lot of virtual interviews. What are your advice? What's your advice and tips for job seekers that now have to interview virtually? I mean, there's a lot of common sense things that might not be such common sense things. I know when I started doing these events, I was not comfortable. I had to really train myself, watch myself. So what's your advice for what are you looking for when you're interviewing someone through Skype, FaceTime, whatever system that you're using? What are some of the things that job seekers can do to practice or prepare for that virtual interview?
Yeah, absolutely. And virtual is not going away. We actually just did a recruitment survey with our managers, and we said, once COVID's over, what method of interviews do you want to do? And the majority actually said virtual interviews. We want to keep them. They're working for us. That's how we want to stay. So they're probably not going anywhere. So one thing definitely is making sure that your computer is working beforehand. Make sure the video is working beforehand. We send you a link so you can double check it, because a lot of times, we have someone has computer problems and, they're not able to do the interview because they had glitches or they couldn't figure out how their camera works or their microphone. So just making sure the basics that it works beforehand is one thing. I think for candidates, it can be really hard to still build that same, rapport that you would have in an in-person interview. And managers, that's one of the biggest things that they're looking for is, how will this person mesh with the rest of the team? And it can be a lot harder to show over a laptop, but that's still what we're looking for is, what's their personality? Are they going to fit over the team, or, because you're, you don't get that interaction walking with the manager to the interview and leaving. Are they a little bit more robotic and don't show their personality as much? So show your personalities through that screen. So yeah, that's definitely a big thing as well. It's okay to take notes, but I know that some managers have complained it looked like, they were looking off to the computer, like almost like they were taking notes when people were asking questions as well. So, really being focused, even though it can be hard through that computer screen, just being really focused on those managers asking you the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really important. So we talk a lot about that when we are, writing articles or content for job seekers. Really looking, you can, I'm looking at myself right now in the box, but really looking at the camera so you're making eye contact, because that's kind of how you're going to communicate through your eyes and your body language and things like that. So I had learned to put a little pink sticky note by my camera so that it prompted me to always look at the camera instead of looking down at the screen or looking at myself, because it can be distracting as well. It can kind of, mess you up in your delivery and things like that. So that was one of the tips that I learned. And you did bring up a good point. So I've had many candidates be late for interviews because they didn't test the technology. So every company has a different way that they're recruiting online, whether it be Skype, FaceTime. There's all these different, some of them have their own systems. Some of them are using Zoom. So you really have to make sure some of those technologies you have to download certain software and things like that. So I've had a lot of candidates that were late because they didn't realize they needed to download the software. They didn't, come in 10 minutes beforehand just to make sure they were all set up. So that's a big kind of organizational thing that could work to your disadvantage. Everyone has technical difficulties. Don't get me wrong, but really make sure you've got your technology set up. And the other thing to add to that is to prepare. When I first started doing these things, I hesitated so much in watching myself, but it was the best way for me to learn. I wasn't making eye contact, or I was saying too much, or, those types of things. So I would practice and watch myself and see the mistakes I was making and try to correct them. And I did that a few times until I kind of perfected my delivery and where I was looking. And when you're doing that for an interview, you really should be practicing interview questions as well. One other thing that I have noticed with applications is I'm not getting as many thank you emails, which I feel like they go a long way because they do show that the person is interested. They had a great interview. I kind of know where they stand in terms of still being interested after our initial conversation. So those have really, I think 1 in every 10 candidates have sent one. And it used to be a very common thing. I don't know if you've noticed the same thing. Not that I want to be thanked or anything like that. I want to see the person's, interest in the company and the organization. So that's another thing that I really look out for. And I think it's very important as someone that's looking for a job to really show your potential employer that you, are interested in the role further.
I completely agree. And I would also add, it was a good point about, practicing, if you can do mock interviews, if you can get a friend to help you with interviews, it's something that we've started offering at our hospital as well. For our staff is doing mock interviews with some of them, because we've noticed, especially for those that are more experienced, they don't articulate all of the answers because it's almost like, I've done it so long that it's just second nature that you don't even think to say all of the steps that you do for something. So having those interviews, or the practice interviews first, are really helpful, as well with examples. Half the time when we ask someone, do you have an example? They don't give that exact example. They would say, well, in some cases, this is what I would do, but we want to know, but can you tell us a specific time? What happened? So that way we can know, how you would likely handle it in the future. And something else I forgot to mention as well for, interviews is make sure that you have a good quiet space to do the interviews, and make sure it's professional as well. We've had candidates who they were in bed because they thought that they could just leave the camera off, but we want to see we want the camera on, we want to see you, make sure it's you, talk to you, make that connection. And so when you're in bed, it doesn't set off the good tone. So just making sure as best as possible, you have a good private space to do that interview.
Yeah, and I think people are very aware and experiencing the same things, that people have
Mhm.
kids at home, people have pets, but
Mhm.
just close the door and kind of really get in that quiet space to really focus on the interview. That's really important. And it's really hard to get an interview now. I mean, I hear this all the time from candidates. It's not an easy thing to do. So once you land that interview, you've got to make sure you're like 1,000% prepared to wow
Mhm.
someone, because it wasn't easy for you to get to that point. So, we have a lot of articles and things like that on our site to really get you prepared for that type of thing. And I really think that, the practicing is the most important thing. And having, like you said, having things to back up that you have strong customer service skills, have like one or two or three different points of things or stories, or, tell your story of how you can help the company, in terms of your past experience. So that's great. So we have about 6 minutes left. Do you want to talk maybe a little bit about some of the jobs you're recruiting for? I think a lot of our attendees would really love to learn a little bit more about maybe different roles that you're looking to fill. So maybe I'll give you, 5 minutes to do that, or however much time you need to kind of go through some of those roles and what you're looking for.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. So we have clinical externs, which are like nursing students. So that way you get your foot in the door before you're even a nurse yet. So, really learning. We have communications clerks. So one thing that maybe not everyone realizes is we don't just have, nurse positions, PSWs, healthcare. We have all different types of positions within the hospital. I'll say some of them now, but we're always posting different jobs. So just because we don't have a maintenance mechanic today doesn't mean we're not going to post a maintenance mechanic position next week. We have communication clerks. We have a lot of different allied health. I'm so sorry if you heard a dog barking in the background.
Okay.
Crisis worker as well. We hire a lot of, mental health opportunities, housekeeping as well. So we have a lot of environmental service attendants, food service as well. And screeners as well. They're all very entry-level positions. So people will come and they get their foot in the door by getting these positions. And then we see a lot of them move up within our organization. One of our human resources business partners, she started as a food service attendant and she made her way into the human resource business partner within our hospital. So it's a good foot in the door as well while you start, you're still going to school or you're building up your education. As well. We have quite a few administration positions like executive assistants that we currently have posted, a lot of lab positions as well, working in our laboratory, patient registration clerks as well. So we're always looking for clerical roles. That's definitely a big one, is many of the clerical opportunities. With clerical with us though, we are looking for those who have the medical terminology. So that's something to look for if you're looking for a clerical or administration role, but in a hospital, that's a course that's really good for you to get. Many patient support assistant roles, and then of course our many registered nurses and registered practical nurses. Definitely the majority of our vacancies are registered nurse. Registered practical nurse are a little bit easier to fill. And then we also have many unit secretary positions. We have supervisor and maintenance as well. So a wide variety of positions.
Amazing. That's awesome. It's such a wide variety. That's,
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, not a lot of people realize that there's positions outside of nursing that are very attractive. And I'm sure you have amazing, benefits and things like that. So it's probably a very sought after place to be. That's for sure. Would you mind maybe just including a link to your careers or how people can apply and see the job descriptions for those roles?
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. So just in the chat there.
Yeah.
Again, if anyone has any questions, we have about 2 minutes left. You're going to put a link there if anyone wants to apply or just learn more about working at the hospital. Rebecca's going to just include her careers link there so that you can apply. I just wanted to thank you again, Rebecca, so much for your time and for being here today. I'm not sure what happened to FGF Brands. I feel bad, but I don't know if there was some technological issues, but I apologize that she wasn't on the panel today. But we really want to thank you for your time, Rebecca. We really appreciate you being here. sorry, you were going to include the, oh, perfect. There it is. So if anyone's interested in applying to Markham Stouffville Hospital, there is the link. We have about 4 minutes left of the event. We will extend it about for an additional 5 minutes. So you can visit the expo area. Don't forget to apply and kind of check out our exhibitors that are there. I know Amico is on today. They have a lot of different roles. Also, they do healthcare. They're in the healthcare industry as well. And we also had Dixie Bloor Neighborhood Center, who's an amazing resource for people that are just looking for advice. I mean, it's they talk about interview skills, helping you write your resume. It's an amazing resource if you are kind of stuck or just need some advice or help in your job search. So want to thank them for being here as well. Thank you to all of our speakers. Thanks to Rebecca again. The networking area will be open. I know a lot of people have been utilizing it today more than normal, which I love to see because that's the whole point of being on today, is to really make connections. So that will continue to be open as well if you want to do some more networking. We have a lot of different events coming up. So I'll have Sandra put the link in our chat here for all of the different, oh, she did about 18 minutes ago. So there's a link there for all of our upcoming events. I know we have a couple tech specific events that are happening, as well as just some general job fairs, a couple more until the end of the year that we have going on in the fall. So definitely you can register for those for free at this time. So definitely check those out. Again, just want to thank everyone for being on the platform today. And remind everyone that we have our online job boards. So there's a number of jobs that are listed there that you can apply to, but we also have recruitment services as well. So I'll have Sandra put in the link for all of our recruitment openings. We have about 40 open positions right now, mostly in accounting, but we do have some tech jobs, some admin jobs there as well. So you can kind of apply for those roles. So I think we've given a lot of jobs and information today. Hopefully you guys took away a lot of different points. Thanks to our director of recruiting, Elise, for her session as well, and to all of our speakers. We hope you have a great afternoon and hope to see you at one of our events in the future. And thanks so much again, Rebecca, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.